All right, hey everyone. I'm Aman. I lead growth at DAOstar. For those of you who do not know us, we are a non-profit. We build standards for DAOs. So generally the way it goes is if there's something that's interesting to the vast majority of DAOs and it needs a standard, then we are the place where you can come together and collaborate on building them. So I want to do this panel on not just technical governance, but also technical governance and security in DAOs. Because from the conversations that we've been having, I came to the realization that not every DAO has a really good framework for managing technical assets or having a really secure structure in place. Some DAOs like Arbitrum, which has really good delegates like Chris, they spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and sometimes they do come up with really good frameworks, but not every DAO has a good delegate ecosystem, or not every DAO has these conversations. But this topic, for example, is something that's important for all DAOs. It's something that we should be making progress on as an ecosystem. So we're starting the conversation here. Hopefully this becomes a working group and we create a set of standards where we converge on and say that, hey, if you're a DAO, you should at least be doing this. So this is a start, and I'm going to stop talking now. And why don't you guys introduce yourself and tell us your name and what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Sure, sounds good. Hey everyone, my name is Mehdi. I'm a co-founder and director of Sigma Prime. We are a blockchain and security research firm. We have been operating in the space for about 7.5 years, doing a lot of security assessments, a lot of smart contract security reviews, L1s, L2s, been working with a bunch of blockchain foundations to help them ship more secure software. But we're also the founders and maintainers of Lighthouse. Lighthouse is an Ethereum consensus client written in Rust. It's free, it's open source, it's fast, and it's responsible for about 1/3 of the network, which is scary and crazy at the same time. We've done a lot of work with DAOs. Very thrilled to have received that invitation to talk about DAO security, because God knows that there's a lot to talk about. Let's pass it on to Michael.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael. I work at Open Zeppelin. Title is Head of Solutions Architecture, but in reality it means leading a lot of different technical initiatives, including a lot of our engagement with DAOs. So a big one is Compound. We're a big security partner of them. We do a lot of proposal reviews, as well as just high-level advisory in the forums, monitoring, et cetera. And then also more recently working with Arbitrum on the Arbitrum Research and Development Collective with folks like Chris, and also working and partnering with folks like Tally that use Open Zeppelin Governor. And there's a lot of DAO things that we are tangentially involved in or directly involved in. And so, trying to make sense of it is part of my job.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raf, one of the co-founders at Tally, which you may have heard about in the previous talk. But for those of you who weren't here, Tally is a platform for protocol governance and DAOs. And we think about security a lot from actually two different perspectives, both the technical security and the kind of social and decentralization aspect of security. When we're building a product, we want to make sure that there's both transparency about what's happening and also transparency about who has power and who's making decisions.
Hey, my name is Chris. I'm from L2Bit. If you don't know L2Bit, we are the ones who are keeping all the Ethereum-centered L2s accountable. We are assessing them, and I'm the governance lead at L2Bit. As L2Bit, we are delegates in many L2 ecosystems, L2 DAOs. Our goal is to be present at every L2-related DAO so that we can be this Ethereum ecosystem steward in those ecosystems as well. And I'm if there is a delegation, I'm usually the delegate.
Sounds good. We have some really cool people on the panel today. And let's start off with a really broad question. So when I say technical governance, it could be things like, say, how do we sign off on code upgrades? So how do we sort of define some sort of a line between a founding company and a DAO? Because at one point, that becomes important. It could be things like if you hire a service provider, which DAOs often do, how do you define an offboarding plan for them? So it could be multiple things that sort of ties back to how secure your infrastructure is. So what do you think about the current state of these things in DAOs? Who wants to go?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll speak for like what we've seen a lot with Compound, but also a lot of other DAOs we started to engage with. Every DAO is different. I think the biggest thing that sets the pace for like a lot of the things you just described is like how involved is the core team after the formation of the DAO, and what do they want to be involved in? So like, I mean, Aave and BGD Labs is a good example. They're still very much driving like what happens in the DAO. They still need to get approval. They still need to go through kind of a political process, but you do have there's a vision for Aave that you are receiving from that core team, and they are essentially themselves also vendors of the DAO now. So even though they're technically kind of on equal footing with other vendors, they obviously are kind of like a first among equals in terms of like determining what the direction of the community will be. And then you have other examples of Compound where there has been definitely a conscious pullback from the Compound Labs team to say we want to let the community decide what the direction is, and you usually see that gap will either be taken up by like core delegates that have been with the community already, that kind of step in to fill the gap, or it will come through service providers sometimes. And so, for example, Alpha Growth has been brought into Compound to now lead both their growth and marketing, which has ultimately kind of been now setting the pace for like what does Compound want to deploy with other service providers such as Compound and Gauntlet. Gauntlet doing risk management, us doing security, kind of being the on the other side of that, kind of like, trying to help make sure that the pace is sustainable, making sure that we're doing, the right risk management and security on the things that we're pushing forward with. And so there's a balancing act, and there's not exactly one person from the DAO that comes in and kind of, tells people like how to balance this. You have to actually kind of have active collaboration between service providers, go to delegates and get feedback, encourage more delegate participation. So you have to take more initiative than you would typically expect a service provider to, but you also still have to get, delegate buy-in and approval and solicit feedback. And sometimes let's say, encourage feedback, or rather just like pull it out of delegate and say like, I'm going to do this. You have a week or two to comment in the forums. And if no one wants to provide a different path forward, this is the path we're taking. And so it's challenging. Every DAO is a bit different. I definitely think the core team model is a bit better in terms of having clear direction, but at the same time, I think if you can make it work without the core team involved, you do actually have a good case study to say that DAOs can operate in a decentralized manner, but that is more challenging.
I think that the answer to this question depends on what is your time horizon, because right now, I believe that, for example, all the L2s, also like the DAOs, are pretty, I would say early, immature. There is this website called L2Beat, and you can go there and see that not any major L2 is on stage 2 right now, not even close. And even if you look in the risk assessment pizza that we are doing, also there is no single major one that is fully green, which basically means that there is still work to do. However, we need this involvement of the organization right now, definitely. We need to have a very smooth process to move those things forward. However, if you think about this in a long enough time horizon, let's say 10 years, 20 years, I'm fortunate enough to be old enough to actually remember early days of the internet. And we in order to treat those things seriously, we need to have this time horizon of 20, 30 years. Those systems that we are building right now, if we are actually, if the goal is to build the backbone of the new financial system, then we have to take into account this time horizon of 10, 20, 30 years. And in this time horizon, I strongly believe that if we are seriously speaking about decentralization, then there is no way to achieve this decentralization without having proper DAO ecosystem running to maintain and control those systems, because those systems will need to adapt to change. Their systems will need to adapt, even if not internally by upgrading the mechanics, but basically the ecosystem will need to adapt to the changing world. And how do we achieve it? if we treat seriously the idea of not having a central organization running everything forward and having full control over what's happening around it, then we need to take seriously the idea of decentralizing the actual decision making. And it's not just decision making, it's idea exploration, solution exploration, actually accountability of the whole ecosystem. There are so many moving pieces that we need to take into account in order for this to make sense. And you might think that this, what I'm speaking right now is like kind of detached from technical governance, like those technical issues, but actually it isn't. Because think about, okay, right now we have all those institutions, all those companies that are developing those systems. 10 years from now, how sure can we be that they will be able to pass the baton to the new generation of people who will be managing those companies? It's not that easy. If you look into companies that we have in the past, it's not that easy for the company to exist for like 20 years. So like the soundness of those systems depend on the actual governance and the actual like social layer of those systems.
Yeah, I think that last point is pretty important because a lot of the questions about security or technical correctness, you can't really answer them without first making sure that somebody owns it, like someone owns fixing the problem or making sure something is working or has a good plan, but also whoever owns it is accountable to a larger, more decentralized structure. So I think we see this a lot across all the DAOs we work with at Tally is you have to figure out how to manage delegating authority, and not just the delegation call on chain, but for all the things that need to get done, like security and audits or other functions of a DAO. Make sure that things are organized and that people are aligned. All of that is work. Someone has to do it. But when we collectively in a DAO figure out who's going to do it and who wants to do it and who can do it, we also have to make sure that it's kind of like political system design. You don't want to give too much power to some team that will then capture that function and in the long term compromise the DAO. Maybe they're aligned for a short or medium term, but it can be pretty bad in the long term if there's no way to keep them aligned and keep other parties sharing the power and sharing control over the collective roadmap.
Sorry, I would like to add something to that because this reminds me of a situation around 15 years ago, Microsoft decided to discontinue supporting MS-DOS. It was old enough, so they decided, okay, enough is enough. We will stop selling it. We'll stop supporting it. So you were not able to obtain a new legal copy of the license for the MS-DOS. And it might say, okay, it was 2005, something like that. So everybody was using Windows, right? Everybody, aside from companies that were actually using MS-DOS in scale. Because, for example, if you've got an accounting company that has like 1,200 desktop stations where people are using the same software for the last 20 years to just input invoices and make sure that everything works, for such a company not being able to acquire a new license for MS-DOS means basically that this company cannot scale anymore. This company has to go through a very, very costly and very, very risky process of actually upgrading everything to the new software. And when we are thinking about finances, you would be like, I've been working with in a company that was dealing with like those IT of financial institutions, like the very backbone. You would be surprised how old all those systems are. And they are old not just because like the companies don't want to invest in improvement, simply improvement of those like libraries and the small pieces of the whole ecosystem is such a huge risk to everything. I saw a project of a retail chain that was trying to replace its system that was running since 70s with a new SAP system. They spent, like the budget was 8 million euro and the time horizon was 5 years. after 10 years and spending 14 million euros, they actually canceled the project. They basically deemed that it's impossible on scale to replace it. They are still using this old server in a well-ventilated room to make sure that the whole company, international company, is running. So these are the problems that we'll be facing soon, and we need to make sure that we lay the groundwork right now so that we are even able to handle those issues in the future.
Right. That makes sense. I want to speak about, I've been writing notes and I wrote immaturity of DAOs, social layer and DAOs, and there are all these tangents we could sort of take. But then I want to ask Mehdi something. So since you work on the forefront of, say, exploits and threat modeling and actual hacks, does some of these hacks sort of tie back into the incompetence of DAOs, or what's the answer to that question?
That's spicy. No, I wouldn't say so. Incompetence of developers, perhaps. No, I'm joking. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm quite worried about the state of the governance in most DAOs. There's been a few examples here about like the most mature ones. We've done a lot of work with Aave, and Aave to me is like a blue chip when it comes to governance and how they right, like we get it slightly technical. When you want to raise a governance proposal, usually it's a pull request, right, on a GitHub repository, and then a set of people go through that branch, hopefully run some tests, and then ultimately merge that branch to their default branch. There's a few attack vectors there that I don't think we are talking about enough. One of them is something I call, or a lot of people call, dependency confusion. It's actually fairly easy to add a submodule, a GitHub submodule, that looks like the genuine thing, like Solidity utils, for example. A bunch of projects use that, right? I can introduce that to my pull request, title that Solidity utils, but effectively what I'm linking to is a repo of my own that's malicious, and that's going to introduce a malicious payload and ultimately perhaps drain the entire DAO. Another thing that I spoke about a couple of days ago is, I guess, an exploit or an attack that I call padding obfuscation. That's probably a better word for it. But when you review a pull request on GitHub, unfortunately, GitHub and the way it works doesn't. If you introduce tabs and white spaces enough, you can actually chuck malicious payload all the way to the right of your screen. So unless you have a massive screen, which most of us don't, right? There's actually no way you're going to find that. You're going to see that. And you'll have to horizontally scroll all the way to actually notice that this is actually not a blank line. There's a malicious payload in there. So yeah, I don't like, this is stuff that is waiting to happen. So that's stuff that we do for some of our clients to kind of try to raise the awareness, be like, see, like this is stuff that you should be worried about. And whenever you review a pull request, some of the things that you should be checking. And there's relatively easy solutions that I'm not seeing pushed enough. One of them is leveraging your CI, right? Like if you're on GitHub, GitHub Actions allows you to automate a whole bunch of these checks, right? I don't think DAOs are doing enough of that, generally speaking, and that's a quick win, right? Like you can do it yourself, or you can hire someone to do it and get a set of checks and scripts that run against any pull request to ensure the consistency and the safety of whatever change you're introducing. So, I'm an optimist. The current state is worrying to me as a security professional. But I do think that there's genuinely a lot of tooling out there that we can easily hook into these DAOs to make things better. So call for action, hopefully, for DAO maintainers out there trying to, we were talking about this the other day, trying to push security to the left, right? And when you look at your development lifecycle, from left to right. Left is when you start, right is when you deploy. You really want to have security embedded within your life cycle. Don't think that auditors are here just like at the end of your development process to put a big green stamp on your code and tell you, yeah, it's all good, you can go live. Or they're there to actually fix your problems. That's not what we do, right? Like we pay us for a bit of time, and then we try to find as many bugs as we possibly can. But we're not. Ultimately, you're deploying the code base, right? Like it's not us.
How do we deal with this as an ecosystem? Because not every DAO is our way. Like not every DAO has a large enough treasury, like
Education.
So do we wait around for each DAO to sort of take their own actions, or do we sort of come together and define, say, a standard and then say, if you're DAOs, maybe you should at least do this?
I think the latter. I really hope that we'll get to a stage where the latter is going to be the solution. So this is where I shamelessly plug the Security Alliance, also known as SEAL. It is a cross-industry consortium of security companies, major projects, DAOs, L2s, L1s that have come together about 18 months ago to recognize the need for a cross-industry authoritative voice in the security topic in our industry. And one of the things that we're looking into is exactly that. A set of standards that we can all agree on, publish, and then literally start naming and shaming projects that don't comply with these things. And we're not just talking about Solidity security or EVM security. We're talking about a lot of OPSEC stuff, off-chain security. So securing your Discord server, your Telegram accounts, your X accounts and whatnot. If you have a fleet of servers, how do you make sure that they're upgraded according to the latest patches released? So I think having a set of standards that we as an industry can point at and just start name and shame people that don't follow these standards.
Like L2Bit does.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I absolutely love the things that you are doing, and I believe that thinking about standards, it's not just like technical standards, but also like procedures, structures, like guidelines. And what we need to make sure is that there are more people capable of actually following those procedures, standards, and so on. So, for example, in Arbitrum, I've been pushing some technical upgrades, for example. And while doing a simple transaction in Governor is easy, like you click through Tally and it works and it's great. Then doing anything a bit even slightly more complicated is you have to light some candles, kill a goat, chant some sing some incantations, and you hope that everything goes right. And nobody, I can tell you that I would probably be able to count on my fingers of my one hand people who are able to validate the thing that I did, and that's bad, basically. And it shouldn't be. Like it can be, even if the people cannot understand the things that the code is doing, at least what they should be able to do is validate whether the code that I say that is being introduced is the code that they are voting on. At least like this is the bare minimum that we should be expecting everybody to actually be able to do. And right now this is not the case, and we will be also working on actually doing some guidelines, doing some tutorials, doing some videos, basically pushing people to try it, because it's not that hard, but it's kind of, there is a high entry barrier as you have to do things that you normally don't do, but we need to push people through that, like literally force it.
Totally. I want to take this. Oh yeah.
So just to add on to that, I think the way people evaluate some fact, to see if some fact is true, is some people evaluate the ground truth. And like you said, we need more people capable of reading some Solidity calls and understanding if those Solidity calls do what the proposer said they were going to do and do what they intended to do. And then many other people actually can't evaluate the code. But usually what they do is they figure out who they can trust and then trust someone who can evaluate, who they think can evaluate the code. So I think actually, because we have a lot of stakeholders in these ecosystems, we need both. We need to make sure there's lots of people who are capable of evaluating a security aspects of a change or auditing the code, and we need to make sure that those people publish their opinions or share the what their thoughts are with a larger group of stakeholders who maybe aren't as technical or just have delegated some of the checks to the people who are. And I often see that gap. Like for a lot of DAOs we work with, there often is somebody evaluating proposals, auditing them, checking them, running them, but they don't share that they did the check. So either two things happen. One, people don't know that there was a check. And two, people might assume that there is a check, even when there isn't. So I think very important that we also figure out a way to, have people check their work and then publish it so that, other people can see if see if something happened and create some public knowledge about things like audits or things like security checks.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was just said, and I think the one thing that we've experienced with Compound is like there's definitely like a challenge with accountability in a DAO of like who ultimately has like ownership of validating this. And like the kind of default answer for Compound to solve when we came in as a security partner was like, we'll just come in, review everything, it opens up, and we'll kind of be able to say if it's safe or not. But then you have this question of, is it going to be every proposal? Is it just the smart contract upgrades that we would definitely consider in our domain to audit? But are we also going to look at configuration proposals? Are we also going to look at just basic treasury proposals? Like, and it came to a point where we had to kind of figure out like a different approach for both for different levels of proposals. We had to break it out into 3 or 4 categories and say like, this is for sure something that we need to audit like ahead of time, any smart contract changes or code upgrades. But then there's other things where it's like, hey, this is just a configuration change that's being done almost on a weekly basis. There can be a best effort like check by someone like OpenZeppelin to make sure it's correct. But at the end of the day, like, if you're seeing like, lending rate adjustments and you have like 20 or 30 different parameter changes that are occurring in the same proposal, and the issue that could come up is, it's 1 decimal place off in this one particular configuration. And the only way, there's no programmatic way to say, is that the correct parameter or not, except just to like look at the proposal text and see if it matches with what's in the proposal payload. And that is almost certainly just a manual process, except maybe to just deconstruct it or decode the call data in a way that makes it clear. We've done that with a tool called Seatbelt on Compound, and it helps. But that's like in the shift left approach, it's like that's usually when the proposal is already up and you have like 2 days of review before it goes to a vote. It would be great to even have that like prior in the PR.
Also, something that I would like to stress out: our current testing environments in terms of what we are able to actually test are, let me put it, imperfect. So it would be like we've learned the hard way in like regular IT that testing and like even test-driven development is something to do, while in smart contract upgrades it's usually like trust me bro approach. Like somebody checked it, yes, we trust it. Can we check actually what this change is introducing, how the system will work after the change? People like at this point, people are asking me to stop asking questions. Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that at Arbitrum there might be a handful of people capable of doing certain checks, and the unfortunate reality is that in some other DAOs there might not be even a handful of people, right? And and then when the unfortunate event happens, it sort of affects us as an ecosystem. So yeah, something should be done. But I want to ask this: can security ever be a community endeavor? For example, will it always remain in the hands of a few people capable of doing that, or is there a way for a DAO to sort of sign off on things on a larger scale?
I think what you need to do is you need to make more explicit accountability. But you also have to be realistic. I mean, the average DAO delegate, like a blockchain club, they're probably not going to have the expertise to be able to deconstruct like a complicated upgrade. Like that's just the case. And most people will only vote because they saw someone that they trust vote. So I feel like one path to that is just to enshrine specific responsibilities for like, okay, who in this DAO like actually knows what they're doing, like can actually deconstruct these types of proposals, and either make that like an explicit expectation that like all of you in this DAO are going to be reviewing it and you are going to post your thoughts and you are going to say that this is secure, or even enshrining it in a separate task, like a multi-sig that has the ability to step in and cancel a proposal if it's malicious. That's something that some DAOs look at. and to incentivize that, because that work is not easy. It's not something you just casually do. You should be getting compensated for that. So I feel like even though that doesn't mean that I think like DAO delegates should still try to strive to have awareness, and there should be tools given to them to help deconstruct maybe treasury proposals, or at least things that are like basic and they can understand what's happening and still weigh in on the governance and that sort of side. But we do need to enshrine who has a technical capability to review things and who should be doing it. So when something goes wrong, it's not everyone pointing around saying, well, why did you vote for it? Well, I saw you vote for it. Like, it needs to be like, who at the end of the day are we trusting to make sure that like this stuff doesn't get through?
Yeah, totally agree. I want to take your question, but look at it from a perhaps broader perspective. There's a lot of emphasis on reviewing upgrades, but I think security as a whole goes way beyond that. And back to your original question of, can we dream of a world where everyone has some type of security, accountability, and knowledge? Heck yeah. I think we should all be striving for that. And education again. But it is ultimately everyone's responsibility, right? If you're a community manager, you are going to be targeted. Right, you've got nothing to do with, smart contract upgrades or ensuring that the actual implementation matches the spec. Like, that's way beyond what your core responsibilities are. But it's super important that you are receptive and aware of the latest attack vectors, that you harden your own personal computer, that you're, following best practices when it comes to your community management. And same goes with business development and your founders, your executives. So I have this dream that everyone is a security aware person when it comes to Web3 operations, because the stuff that we deal with is you can't really compare it to Web2, right? Or you can compare it to critical systems development, perhaps. But anyone who's got a stake in these systems, in these protocols, should really be thinking about these topics. And what I'm seeing today is just not the case. It's just the collection of people like us getting pulled in to review proposals whenever they're raised, and that's about it. And when shit happens, everyone's like pointing finger, that Spider-Man meme. It's like, yeah, but you voted on that thing. But I voted because you voted. So it's I do think there's a big catastrophe waiting to happen on one of these large DAOs in the coming months, years. I hope I'm wrong. But we definitely need to make a lot more people accountable, responsible, and aware of the security implications of their work.
Right. I'm going to borrow your phrase and start my conclusion with, I have a dream that we have a future in which DAOs strive towards a minimum level of security. And I think being a DAO also introduces a whole lot of other dependencies, right? When I used to be a deep DAO, there used to be people who would buy our API and see if the token market cap is lesser than the treasury value, and if yes, let's sort of do a governance attack. Let's engineer something social and sort of liquidate the treasury and do stuff, right? So there's a whole lot of other dependencies that this whole decentralization thing gives you. And a shameless plug on Mehdi's plug of Seal. So DAOstar is trying to create a set of security standards for DAOs. So these would be things like, can we all sort of agree on a set of minimum viable standards that we should be striving towards if you're a DAO? We're just starting the work. So if you guys are interested in collaborating, please reach out. And we have a few minutes for questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yes. Yeah.
Hello, how are you guys? Now that you mentioned about the work on the security alliance, and I have a question that's on topic. It's not an easy answer, but it will help us to start thinking about it. How do you think the user experience of a guideline of some sort, or Web3 governance guidelines, practices, standard, should be drafted in order for people to actually use it?
Oh, I love this question. I'll take that one if that's okay. I think it's being targeted at me. So I think, as we've discussed and established over the past few days, it is going to be critical for the success of this initiative to have a set of guidelines, best practices, frameworks, whatever you want to call them, that are easily consumable. If we throw a whole bunch of text at you, chances are you're just not going to follow that text, right? You're just going to get bored and scroll through a couple of sections at best and be like, yeah, this is not for me. This section is not for me. Whereas maybe if you continue scrolling down, the next section is actually really applicable to the work that you do. So a few things that we're considering as part of that Security Alliance initiative. Having the ability to filter roles, right? Not everything is applicable to everyone. If you are a community manager, again, you probably need to worry about your Discord, your Telegram, your X account, etc. If you're a founder, there's a set of things that you perhaps should be thinking about kind of mid-long term. If you're a developer, if you're a Solidity developer, secure best practices when it comes to Solidity. If you're a DevOps person, how do you secure your cloud deployments, things like that. So hopefully we'll have a way to filter things out. That's one. And two, trying to gamify the whole experience, right? And have, things like progress bars and colors and just making it it sounds silly, but it actually makes a big difference. That's the feedback that we received after coming up with a whole bunch of content and putting it up on a website. And people were like, yeah, that's great, but I don't think anyone's going to actually follow that. Yeah, you get some badges. Someone suggested NFTs and tokens and things like that. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say we just need L2 beats for DAO governance. That's what I was someone who just it's not just giving you the pretty colors, but also then coming into your DAO and complaining when you don't do it.
Yeah, and another thing that we should do, in my opinion, is simply push people to do it, because the more people do it, the more people are capable of doing it, the more the expectation is that people should be able to do it. 20 years ago, it was pretty normal that we were compiling our own kernel in order to even use our desktop. Right now, it doesn't just work right away. It's no, it's broken. So in my opinion, if if I follow their guidelines, if you follow their guidelines, if 7 other people from here follow their guidelines, and we share this, we talk about it, then suddenly other people will be interested in, okay, I want to be like those cool guys. I want to also be able to follow these guidelines. We need to set these expectations, a social pressure. I've been UX consultant for 15 years. No UX will overcome the fact that people simply don't want to do it. Why would they want to do it? They need to spend time. They need to put an effort. They will be responsible later on for doing that as they can do it. We need to put up social pressure and make sure that it is expected for people to do that.
I mean, there are I think about 2 ways, right? You have the possibility of do positive incentives and negative incentives. I don't know which one's gonna be best, but maybe we could use both of them at the same time. There's also having some debate on where there should be a centralized authority, which for many people using the word centralized can be a bit of a turnout. That actually, I don't know, I'm not gonna say audit, but just sort of a screening in order to have them we're not going to do it at Security Alliance, but we could draft everything and then maybe another authority can use that as a base, or maybe I don't know.
And I think it's a great thing for the workshop Aman will be doing later at 2 p.m. because now we are running out of time, but then we can have all the discussions. So if you are here, stay 2 p.m. Aman will be running a workshop about the governance. And
come to the workshop. We'll be in that room right there in 1 hour, half an hour?
In an hour. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully you could good hours and security for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you guys.